Everyone, I'm Sandhya, Department of Mathematics. Today we are going to see about the graph. So first, we see the graph. In this graph, we have to represent vertex and edges. Consist of a non-empty set. Here, the vertex is denoted by V1, V2, etc. Called the set of the vertices. And here also the edges is naming as E1, E2, etc. is said to be the set of edges of the graph. Okay. Next here phi is a mapping from the set of edges E to the uh, ordered pairs of elements of y. The vertices are represented by the point of each edge is represented by a line okay, so here see one example. Here the see the graph. In this graph there are four vertices are there: v1, v2, v3, v4. Okay, here the vertices is connected into the edge that is denoted by e1, e2, e3, e4, e5, e6. Okay, so here the collection of v1, v2, etc, v4 is the set of vertices, and the collection of edges is called the set of edges. Okay, so here the self loop in this graph, the self loop is V2 having the self loop. Here, if there is an edge from Vi to Vi, then it is called the self loop. In this figure, E5 is a self loop. Okay, so see the vertices V2 here having the self loop. Okay, so next, parallel edges. In this parallel edges, if there is edges have some end points, then is called the parallel edges. Here see E3 and E6 having the parallel edges. Next, incident. If we vertex V1 is an end vertex of the same edge EK. EK is said to be incident with VI. So E4 is incident. See the graph. E4 is incident, the vertex V1 and V3. So E4 is incident with V1 and V3. Okay. Next, adjacent vertices and an edges. Two edges are said to be adjacent if they are incident on a common vertex. Two vertices Vi and Vj are said to be adjacent if there is Vi and Vj is an edge of the graph. In this graph, E1 and E4 is a incident vertices. So similarly, V1 and V3 are the adjacent vertices. So V1 and V3 are the adjacent vertices. Okay. So next, we have to see the simple graph. A graph does not having the self loop and parallel edges is called the simple graph. Next, isolated vertex. A vertex or single vertex is called the isolated vertex. Okay, next, pendant vertex. If an degree of any vertex in one, then in this graph the degree is C. In this V1 having 2 degree and V3 having 2 degree. Okay, so an vertex having the degree 1 is called the pendant vertex. Next, directed graph. In a graph the direction is given, it is called the directed graph. Next, the directed graph is another name is digraph. Okay, next, undirected graph. A graph does not having a direction is called the undirected graph. So here see in this two graph, first one is the direction is given, so it is a directed graph. In the second one, it is the now the direction is mentioned here, so it is a undirected graph. Okay, so next, mixed graph. In some edges are directed and some edges are undirected. The graph is said to be a mixed graph. Okay, so next, multigraph. A graph which contains some parallel edges is called the multigraph. A graph containing the parallel edges. So in this graph, the graph containing a parallel edges, isn't it? So here the V3 and V4 as a parallel edges. So in this a graph containing parallel edges is called the multigraph. Okay, next, pisograph. pseudograph. In this pseudograph, in which loops and parallel edges are called a graph having self loop and parallel edges, that graph is called a pseudograph. Okay, so in this section we saw what is a graph and what is a edges and what is vertices and the self loop, parallel edges, and incident, simple graph and multigraph, pseudograph. So these are the types of a graph. Okay, thank you.